Well, it is 10:15, so I'm going to
Great. Thank you, Mel.
Introduce and thank you all for coming. My name is Mel Sykes. I'm one of the board members for Alaska Food Policy Council, and it's my honor to welcome you to session 5D, which is called Biochar, Utilizing Burnt Local Carbon for Better Plant Production, with University professors Art Nash and Ming-Chu Zhang. So I'm going to pass it off to you and let you get started.
Okay, thank you very much. I should clarify that we are from the School of, or the Institute rather, of Ag Natural Resources and Extension out of UAF. Ming-Chu is the only true professor here out of this duo. He's a full professor. I'm merely associate, and I work as an energy specialist as far as the practical day-to-day things. And then Dr. Zhang works in agronomy and soil science on the academic and research end.
No, the only difference between Art and Nash and me, is Art only have two part of the appointment, which is extension and the research. Where my part is research, extension, and education. I teach. That's all. Only the difference we have.
Well, and he's 10 times smarter than I am. So as far as academically, though, Ming-Chu is certainly correct. We wanted to share today a little bit about biochar, what it is, how it can be made at different scales, and then some of the applications or testing that have been done in the past and what we found. So Alaska certainly has farming challenges. We have short season, obviously, with the high solar gain in the middle of the summer. We also have a need for wood removal from a lot of cropland. If you were to look at a map of the Delta Junction area in the early 80s, when it had been cleared for the ag project, and then you were to superimpose a map today of open lands, you can see that over the last 35 years, especially with poplar and birch, there's been quite a bit of that property that has gone back to woodland. And so in looking forward to try to go ahead and extend ag, there's a desire to go ahead and remove some of that wood. Maybe for some farmers, in talking with Phil Kaspari in Delta, it merely means trimming off each year a bit of the bordering woodland that's right next to the farm field, so that they can get several more rows in. Typically, in the past, the farmers have noticed something peculiar, according to Phil, and that they would go ahead and cull the trees on the edges, drag it in a row, and then they had farm field on either side of that row, and then they would go ahead and they would burn it. Now that means that there was an awful lot of marled wood, all kind of bunched together in a long row. And in the bottom of that row, of course, because of all the brush and all the biomass on top, not much oxygen would get in. It would be fairly free of oxygen. And so they would start and they would burn that row, and they would find that just anecdotally, without any type of secure testing, as an intention just to get rid of the biomass and get things back down to dirt, they found that there was quite a bit of greening that would show up naturally in the spring down that row that exceeded the greening on either side of it. So there's been kind of this acknowledgement, certainly from those who are trying to reclaim cropland, that if they row things and they go ahead and build a long channel of heaped up biomass and start on fire, that there's something about that that definitely is advantageous for vegetation. The other issue at hand, though, to be quite honest, is that especially in the interior and over by Delta Junction, there's so much wood on the ground right now. There was a fire pretty close by in the Fort Greely area several years back, and there's still a lot of dead standing timber that's charred. It didn't necessarily from the ground fire consume all the trees, so they're dead standing. There's a lot of trees that have fallen, and therefore there's an awful lot of fuel on the ground. That it certainly takes a large budget from Forest Service every year to try to put out fires. As much fuel as can be removed and then made into something useful, all the better. Also, Ming-Shu can speak to the type of soils we have as far as being acidic and deficient of a lot of nutrients.
You want me to talk?
Oh, yeah, well, I just didn't know if you had
Oh,
anything
okay,
to add
okay,
to
you
that.
go
Ming-Shu.
ahead, go
You're
ahead.
more than welcome. Okay, thank you. So biochar to the eye looks like charcoal. It looks like the type of stuff that you, after you know, an evening at the campfire, kind of brush around with your foot and down toward the bottom of whatever fire ring you had. This is the residue that's left over. The difference with biochar, though, and what's in your normal fire pit is this. In your fire pit where you put a bunch of wood in and brush on top, and you usually start it on fire from the bottom. Usually you try to inject or insert type of, you know, some type of ignition source in the bottom of it and then get it to burn up. And often people will crib their wood in fire rings so that they can get adequate air underneath. What you end up in the morning with is a lot of whitened ash on top. You'll notice that we don't see any white ash here. There's a good reason for that. It's because the white ash indicates that the lignin fibers of the wood and the gases that are embedded have been totally consumed through combustion because of there being adequate air on the top of the fire pile. However, when you dig deeper, where air has difficulty getting down into the bottom of the ring, you'll find that it's almost all black. And that's because a process has taken place where the wood more or less roasts with the lack of oxygen or as much oxygen on the top. You end up with lower temperatures. Pyrolysis, it's similar to when we have it in controlled settings where we starve oxygen, kind of an anaerobic environment, if you will, and then we're able to just roast it. There's an advantage to doing that in that you don't just end up with white ash, but you still end up with a structure of the wood, that's intact. Now, that white ash certainly has a high pH value, or it's higher than maybe the acidic soils. So a lot of people will in their garden add ash from their fireplace with a lot of the whitened material where the fibers have been pretty much all consumed. And it helps in that regard as far as the pH. But we're looking for something deeper, so to speak. We're looking for some advantage out of the charcoal where no air has been able to access it. And what we would like to get at, and these are photos from an SEM microscope in some work that Ming-Shu has done. We're looking for tiny pores. So think of it this way. Think of it as kind of a reservoir, that this chunk that's magnified many times under the microscope, a chunk of wood, it's still able to keep some of the structure, but a lot of the material in between some of the fibers has been blown out, or through heat has been burnt out. But you still have pore holes. And so in essence, there's also a lot of gases, flammable gases, various carbon-based flammable gases that were embedded with those fibers. That's all consumed, okay? All those gases are out of there. So now you have all these small little voids within this structure, as where, again, with ash, you don't have those voids because everything's been pretty much burnt up. And if we magnify even more so, we've got 220 times, you can see these vessels that still exist in the structure. Now, obviously, if you took this between your fingers and you squished it and rubbed it, you could break those down. But the real benefit here is that this charcoal doesn't biodegrade. So as long as this piece of char isn't crushed, these vessels year after year are available for storage. And then here's even closer up, you can see some of these vessels or tubes or pores. So I mentioned that often when we burn at lower temperatures for a smaller amount of time, we have a lot of wood gases that are present. And as we increase temperature and the amount of time, that is the residency time of exposure at a particular temperature, those gases flee and they're burned up in themselves in the process. And so we keep on moving on down as we increase time and temperature as to how much energy we have. And here's the thing about biochar. We are not into any energy. We just want the structure. Now, in some cases where we torrefy wood in order to make it a substitute that can be crushed and equally mixed with coal, so that when they burn in coal plants, torrefied wood, which hasn't been exposed to as much temperature as biochar or for the same amount of time, we still have energy value. And the advantage of that is, especially for nations that have carbon limits, they can still operate their coal plants. And when they start to come up to that limit, because biomass or wood is considered carbon neutral, they can go ahead and substitute and pull some of the coal out and put torrefied material in there, torrefied wood, still get some energy out of it and not be fined or not abrogate their limit on coal burning. So this is a useful product, but leave the wood in longer, higher temperatures, and then we can get biochar. So those pores that I mentioned, think of those as hotel rooms for small microbes. Think of it as maybe meat lockers also for various nutrients, whether it's petrochemical fertilizers or compost that's decaying. And the microbes can pick up those nutrients that are less readily able to percolate through the soil now because they're caught up in the structure. The microbes can take them and go back and forth to the roots, as well as it will absorb water. Now that's probably way too simplistic of an explanation. Hotel rooms for bugs to go ahead and run back and forth with food to roots. But just at the very base level, the structure provides that. Ming Shu, that was super basic. Any kind of detail as to how the microbes and the nutrients in those pores interact?
Well, I mean, basically you have to think in a way that, soil have microorganisms, right? And where the organisms live in the soil, they live in the pores, right? So the pores, the number of pores and the pore structure in the soil, which dictates the number of microorganisms to live. You know, if the room is filled up, there's no more room, and then will be less organisms to live. But when you add this biochar, as you can see, you know, the cell structure is there in the char, but those ones can serve as a rooms for microorganisms, because number one, this is because it's small in pores, it can have the water by capillary force move into those small pores to support organisms to live. That's one. Number two, is also have a lot of surface structure there, which allows the interactions of organisms with the surface, which contains the nutrients, and also have exchange capacity, which can catch anything go through the pores through water and catch those nutrients so that they can use it. So, and also this also serves as a protection units for organisms to prevent prey and predators to attack them. So it provide a perfect archaeology structure for microorganisms to live. And because the microorganisms live in the soil are more, and that will create a good environment for the plants to grow, you know, because any of our plants have the roots have interactions with microorganisms, you know, so this is just an add up for what Art has indicated.
Much better explanation. Thank you, Ming-Chu. So the kind of common knowledge that a lot of Americans had gotten about biochar was the introduction of an article just about a couple decades ago in National Geographic, Where Food Begins. It was in the September issue of, I believe, 2006, I believe. But Where Food Begins, and there was an article about Terra Preta. And there was mention of Amazonian archaeology excavations where they were doing digs at old locations that the indigenous peoples in the Amazon had lived at. And they noticed that they were able to do farming practices and stay in one place for generation after generation. That soil depletion with simple means of agriculture, tools and techniques wasn't making them move. The soil was staying rich. And so the fertile Terra Preta deposits were dug up, and then they started to look at the layers to try to get a historical idea of what had happened. And what they found was that there were these locations where farming was done, where food wastes and even human wastes were thrown into a pit, the best they could tell from the archaeology, and that they were mixed, that there was evidence also with fires in those pits from a very robust structure intact charcoal that had left behind. So it appeared as though the pits that had been used for the waste, that instead of just slash and burn agriculture on the top of the ground, they were filling the pit and then starting the pit on fire. And as deep as these were, it seems evident that they were burning it from the top down, that they were burning whatever they would throw in there from the top down. And that's interesting as we take a look at ways that we can mimic this through fabricated vessels to try to get the same result, which was a very rich soil that had biochar, as Ming-Chu said, to regulate the water, the microbes, and the nutrients from the compost that were thrown in there. So This is the area we're talking in South America, very large basin, very humid or moisture laden environment. So this was especially important to regulate that moisture in the soils to keep the soils fertile. And you can see just from an image here, the carbon content seems to increase here in the 6.5 foot depth, which was probably the depth at which they were able to basically make their pits, because then they would run into rock. And so just to get an idea about this, as to how this fits into agriculture in South American civilization, it was about in the 1540s where one of the explorers described these large cities that were being able to subsist by and large on agriculture. And the term Terra Preta was first used then by a missionary in the 1670s. And if you'll note, though a Dutch soil scientist in the 60s went ahead and published Amazon soils, and it was the first in the literature type of our modern academic literature, Terra Preta, and noted that it had been found in the 50s. It was in the 80s that they found that there were other places that had similar types of subtropical agriculture where they were finding these pits and methods that have been discovered over the years for rich soil. So if biochar has, as Ming-Shu mentioned, an advantage of having a good surface area and keeping a retention of moisture, and then also snagging, if you would, some of the nutrients that come with the moisture and such like that. How can we make it for our own situation, our own gardens and such? And what can we make it out of? So different species of wood have different properties. And so Ming-Shu and two other folks and myself were down at the farm, and there was a piece of equipment 5 years ago that had been left there specifically to make biochar. And it was a pipe, about a 2-inch pipe that had an auger in it that was plugged into the wall. It was electric. And so you would go ahead and feed small wood chunks, and we would get very small pieces, almost sawdust size, and then we would get little larger chunks to see if there was a difference. Spruce, poplar, birch, wanted to see if the different species and maybe the different size of feedstock could make a difference as to the efficacy of the biochar. The problem is that once you go ahead and drop it into the feeder, into the auger, and you'll end up with 500 degrees or so in this auger, 525. The question is, how do you keep the oxygen out? Because you don't want oxygen in here, or else that's going to allow in this vessel combustion to happen. We want this to be anaerobic, and the solution is to go to one of the welding supply shops and get argon gas, a canister argon gas, and to feed argon gas in, which will basically block the oxygen from going down the bunker with the feedstock. And so that's how we achieved that. There was a controller for speed. So we could speed this up or we could slow it down. Remember, time and temperature, residency time and temperature can make a difference on the final pore sizes and product, we believe. There needed to be a vent. Now this is kind of interesting. Whenever you do pyrolysis, you end up with tars. And the tars are actually somewhat water resistant. So we have a jar here that the tars can go ahead and drip down into, and we have water because they're very hot tars. So you would find these globs of tars floating more or less, depending on how large of a water jar you had. And these weren't just something that you could necessarily well, let me put it this way, through later refinement, you can go ahead and break these tars down and get a type of biodiesel out of it. But we were just interested in the char itself. So now this is for experimental purposes, because we would end up with a small dish, and that isn't going to be enough really to do much, maybe for a house plant or such. But we just wanted to get the different specimens to look at them under the microscope and try out maybe in real small plots you could. So what are some answers then for the person who says, I have a very large garden or I have a farm? Well, probably the predominant type of vessel that has been created that you can find on Ithaca Institute. It's in Switzerland, and it's Ithaca with a K. If you go to the Ithaca Institute, you'll find scads all over the world of different pictures and different feedstocks that are being used with the Kontiki kiln. You'll find that in some parts of the world where they have vineyards, they're trimming the vineyards and throwing the trimmings in and burning them. So they're grapevine trimmings. You'll find that people put in just brush wood from clearing land. So it might be pine, it might be oak. There are all sorts of others. Some will put manure in. And the idea behind this vessel is simply this. You have basically 2-foot flat plate. So this is like an upside down ice cream cone sliced, truncated cone. And then you have 5 foot up here. You can pile all of your material, and then brush and stuff, you can burn it from the top down. And because of this 60 to 65 degree angle here, what happens is once the fire makes its way down into the more dense area of brush where there isn't oxygen, it'll start to chase out some of the wood gases, and you'll see a swirl go around and around, a vortex of gases. And those gases, as they come out and they burn and you see this flame swirl, it's actually pushing out or making a barrier from oxygen getting down to where the wood is roasting. This up here on the surface will consume. And you can add more as this gets consumed. It just turns to white ash because of the availability of oxygen. At some point, when it burns down to about 1/3, and you notice that now the vessel is getting deeper and keeping some of the oxygen out, and most of the ash is then off the top and combustion isn't really going on as much, you take cold water and you douse it. You douse it. Now this means you have to have a strong vessel of 10 gauge or 12 gauge metal so it doesn't warp. But you cool it off immediately. A lot of steam comes off, and now you have basic biochar here. And if you put it on a stanchion with a pin, then you can tilt it. And if you put a little, a small valve on the bottom of brass that's welded on, you can open up the valve and you can let the water out. Anyway, this is a very popular style. Another popular style is what's called the TLUD. The TLUD, and it's top lit updraft burn. I'm going to try to just demonstrate how you can make one for your scale of maybe houseplants. And then I'm going to show a film, a 6-minute film of a fellow who, Heidi Rader from Cooperative Extension on our YouTube site, demonstrates on how to make a TLUD for a gardening or a farm scale. So in general, if you had a number 10 tin can, a 1 gallon can, okay, and it was empty, this one has pineapple in it right now, but if it was empty, with this being open and this being still closed because you used a can opener, you could go ahead and poke holes around the bottom. Take a pick and poke many holes. And then you could take a small can, such as this, it's shorter than the can itself, the height of the can. So this would be the bottom, this would be the top. What you can basically do is fill this with wood. fill this empty can with wood. And this is already empty. So this has wood, and you slide it inside, all the way so that if you then sit it upright, this is resting by its own weight and trapping the wood in the middle of this can. Now that means that around the rim, because this diameter is much smaller than this, around the rim, you have space to jam in wood pieces. All right, so you have wood in the container that is tight by its own weight down on the bottom, but then in the open area, you jam it with wood so that when this wood around this donut area is set on fire, with oxygen being able to enter in through these holes so that we get combustion, it will basically roast what is inside of this can. And when this wood is all the way down and gone, then you can tilt it and you can pull this out, and the wood inside will be biochar. An interesting thing happens when you get towards the end. You'll notice that steam comes out of here because there's moisture laden in the wood, but you'll hear a puff often or a pop, and you might even see from the little holes this can lift up a little bit and then drop. That's usually the gases and the moisture getting out of that central can, and you're pretty much near the end of your charring experience. Now, on a much more realistic scale, for those who aren't just doing houseplants, I'm going to go ahead and share, again, just a 6-minute film. So, and now I want to screen share. Okay, share screen, share sound. I'm going to stop this after 2 seconds to ask you if everyone can hear it just fine. Okay, so you hear some intro music. I'm going to stop it and I'll just do a check. Can everyone hear the music?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear it.
Great. Okay, here we go.
Hi, I'm Heidi Rader here in the Alaska Garden. I'm with UAF Cooperative Extension Service and Tanana Chiefs Conference. I'm here in Homer, Alaska, checking out all the cool things farmers are doing here to extend the season, like high tunnels, hoop houses, low tunnels, and also the other cool tools they're using as small-scale farmers. I'm here at Oceanside Farms in Homer, Alaska with Don McNamara, and he's going to show us how he makes biochar. So Don, what's so great about biochar?
Biochar is condominiums for microorganisms. And when you put it in your compost pile, they all just swarm right in there. It's like a new house sale.
Nice. So it's a great thing for organic farming and soils?
And soil building, yeah. So organic farming is all about building soils. Any way you can do it, improve your soil.
Okay, so how do you make biochar?
It's combustion with no air. So we use a tank like this and we fill it as full as we can with 2x material. It's good to use kiln dried material. If you try and use logs and things like that, they won't dry out as well. Might take a couple burnings to get it to work. But like this, it's going to be just like that in about 3 hours.
So what kind of wood are you using?
We're using old pallets and debris left over. We just built a house a year ago, so getting rid of the wood pile. Recycle, reuse. So the pallets are easy to come by in Homer. You know, they ship them up and they don't really want to ship them back. So they're free for the taking.
Another great way to recycle.
Yeah.
Reuse.
So I think what we'll do is put the lid on this and then we'll put it in the 55-gallon drum and go to the next step.
And how big is this container?
This is about a 30-gallon drum, and we got this at the local metal recyclers place there.
And so it's all filled up with wood, and then you've got some holes here on the top.
Yep, so we'll just take this lid and put it right on there. And we'll pin it together.
And use nails to hold it on?
I used to use screws, but the holes just kept getting wobbled out. So.
Okay. All right, so you're gonna put this smaller barrel into the larger barrel?
Yep, so we wrestled that lid right on there, and we used some nails in these little tiny holes to hold the lid in. So really this is the bottom. And so we're gonna roll a 55-gallon drum over it because this thing is so heavy, an old timer couldn't pick it up. We get it to about there, and I'll watch my fingers. Oh.
Nice. So that's inside there, and then why do you have the holes on the outside of the outer barrel?
We have that to let some combustion air in, and we'll put the chimney on top of it, and it'll just be a roaring inferno in no time flat.
Nice.
Yep. But the first thing we're gonna have to do is call and check in with the troopers and make sure it's okay we can burn today.
Right.
Hi, this is Don McNamara.
So I'm going to skip by the part on the phone because it takes a bit of time. But you can see that it's the same idea as mentioned with the small can, that you're trapping your fuel down below and trying to trap the air out, but then allowing on the outer drum for it to burn with air. Here we go.
Thank you. Bye.
So there's a little space between the inner barrel and the outer barrel here?
Yeah, so there's a little space around the inner and the outer barrel, about 1.5 inches, and we'll just take these boards and fill that space, and yep.
It looks like the film got stuck. And I apologize. But basically now they'll put the lid on and then they'll start the fire on top. Top lit updraft. The air will come from here. The fire will start burning here and start to suck up the air through the holes basically. And so that's an easy way with a 30-gallon drum, and you can buy those at various stores that do reclamation. That you can go ahead and often they'll have bolted tops on. You can take the top off. And he went ahead and put a top on when he put it upside down. Usually the weight of the drum will allow you so that if you don't have a top, it's just fine because it's upside down. So that's an illustration then of a very common type of simple low-cost TLUD. Now, out of the 30 gallons, that's going to give you approximately 10 gallons of wood. And here's some of sundry different styles. So another style that Kelpie Wilson out of Oregon has plans on her website, her biochar website, is to make an Oregon kiln. And I've had my, well, not mine, but for those of us who work at the university, we have had an Oregon kiln fabricated from metal sheeting, as well as a kiln, a Kontiki, by taking it to a local fabricator who makes fuel tanks. And the cost is about $1,000 for the Kontiki. Now the price has probably gone up because it was before COVID. And this was, I think, about $750. But they basically make an ashtray that you can see from the side is just a trapezoid, and they put rebar handles so that, like with Forest Service, they can drag this through the woods behind on a four-wheeler, load it up, go ahead and pile it, start it on top. And you're going to end up with ash in the corners because you don't have that centrifugal or that vortex happening. But still, some ash with biochar isn't going to hurt anything. It's just you have that much less biochar. So that's known as the Oregon kiln. Now, biochar isn't just for the reasons that we have said to increase agricultural production, but it's actually used in some electronic components, animal feed. They'll actually mix it in, and then when the animal ruminates, and then makes manure, there's already biochar mixed with the manure. And that's pretty important because we've got some slides up of some Whitehorse projects that were done that show the effects of mixing biochar, which is just a structure, with compost. Okay, and it's favorable. Also, it'll be used in socks, in gutters, as filtration for water that's going down storm sewers. It can be used also in building materials when it's compressed, and even packaging, and in mining to absorb trace heavy metals that have been loosened up during the mining operation and are around settling ponds. And so this is Whitehorse College results. And Ming-Shu, are you okay if I let you describe this and then your results in Whitehorse?
No, you just go ahead,
farm?
just describe it,
Okay.
and then I can add on.
You bet. Okay. So Labarge in 2013 and 14 did a fantastic study where they looked at 3 mining sites throughout the Yukon, tribal mining sites. Gold mining was one, another one, I believe, was silver, and there was another metal. Well, they want to go ahead and they want to get ground cover on the areas where they disturbed. So they wanted to grow back as fast as possible so they could be done with the reclamation process, or they want the most effective. So they planted some plots where it was only seed. Look how bare it is. And then they added seed with just biochar, just the structure. And then they also did seed without biochar, but just compost. But guess what these two are? These very bushy plots here with the secret arrows. If you can unmute yourself, or if you have something in the chat, any idea what the mixture was for these 2 very prodigious plots? Well, for sure it would be seeds, right? But what else do you think was the mix here? Any ideas? I'll go to chat. Okay, someone said all 3, seeds, biochar, and compost. Yeah, and that was both Katie and Savannah. And that's the case. That's the case. So the compost was able to load or get in those crevices and help those microbes. Also Ming-Shu had done some studies with farmers in Whitehorse with plots, taking a look at biochar as well. And Ming-Shu,
Can you move to previous slides?
Yeah, or I'm sorry, you bet, right there.
Yeah. Can anyone guess which one has a biochar application, which one has not? This is a garden plot from the growers field. The one on the left have a biochar, or the one on the right have the biochar? Yeah, the one on the left have the biochar. As you can see that from the color, and the soil in the Whitehorse area is actually has a lot of clay. You know, also poor in organic matter content and hard to work with. This grower has a biochar application over years. As you can see, one is color changed, and the second is much loose, you know, easy to grow vegetables in the area for the root penetration. So this is, and just one important thing is, in these cold climate conditions, you have a black color earth. It absorbs heat faster, so the seed will germinate faster than the one without the color, black color. So
great. So even the biochar helps then with heat retention, it sounds like.
This is the trial we did in the Whitehorse area. We have a biochar application, just straightly comparison, biochar application, no biochar application with with a barley, with hay grass, and with potatoes. So what we found in this, I mean, I don't think we have the data here, but anyway, what we found is, I mean, because this as you see the earliest literature put in the slides is this application over time, you can see that beneficial. I'll show the column of the soil, one with biochar, one without biochar. That's accumulation over years. You have that benefit, in the Amazon area. But here we only have 2 years application. I mean, with a little bit of application there, but we only see potato benefit from it. But we didn't see benefit of the hay grass as well as barley, but potato. So biochar application is you need you either apply a lot in a year, but then that's not realistic because you don't have a lot of waste to produce biochar, but rather you need to constantly make biochar to put in the land to improve your land. So here I want to emphasize, Amazon, you have that story. People did that either in Amazon, Africa, because those places where soil is extremely developed, which means they are mature in a way, not much nutrients left in the soil. Left over is the red earth. So when people put biochar, that really make a significant change over time to improve the crop production. Here in Alaska, we also is very, very less developed in the way that we don't have much nutrients as well in the soil because it's less developed. So if we use biochar, that really can help the production level. With this food security, food safety issue in the States, I think, and we have a lot of waste, and we didn't quite realize their value. So we learned we need to, the process is pretty simple. I know you need to ask a fire permit or something, but if you keep aware of this magical black chars can help you to improve your production, and then you will adopt it as a part of your practice over time, and you will see the difference in your soil in terms of vegetable production or food production, whatever, so it's good for the land. Otherwise, I mean, the waste wood in the tree, in the forestry is a hazard. It's a hazard because it's a fuel storage in the forest. It can burn, right, and cause the forest fire. But if we can use those waste wood, especially in some area, you have those spruce beetle attack the trees, large areas. That will be a hazard if we don't treat it. But how do we treat it? I mean, I know years ago we sold that to Japan, but now I think the trade is kind of like a supply chain is kind of blocked out. We have to think some uses for those.
Thank you.
Oh,
Yeah. Wow, Ming-Shu, that's fantastic. Thank you.
Art, we need to wrap it up. We have another presentation that needs to start right now.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And there's Ming-Shu's and mine's information. Mel, thank you very much.
No problem. If you can stop sharing screen, I can get her
yeah.
set up. And I
Okay.
want to thank
I'm
you
all
for
done.
your wonderful presentation. You guys shared some wonderful information.
Thank
you. Enjoy the rest of the conference. And we're going to be starting our next set here. Let me just unspotlight our previous speakers because this is all right. And okay. So, Jen, if you can put on your screen, on your camera, I can get you set.
My camera's not showing.
All right. Nope, I've got it. And
Okay.
I'm getting you spotlighted here. Okay. So there we go. All right. So I'd like to introduce Jen Landry. She is giving us a presentation. You are in session 5D. And my name is Mel Sykes. I'm the moderator for this room today. But I'd like to introduce Jen Landry. She is a registered herbalist, a bodywork therapist, a nutrition coach, and small farmer and her company is called Stellar Botanical Health. So welcome, Jen, and I look forward to hearing your presentation.
Okay, and can everyone confirm that you can see me and you can see my first slide and that you can hear me?
Yes. Yeah.
Awesome.
Good.
Okay. I'm in Gustavus, and I can just tell you that I spent the last hour troubleshooting computer issues. So I'm taking a deep breath. Thank you all so much for showing up here this morning. I know we're all busy and life is full, and I just really appreciate you taking this time. So I'm presenting Redefining Nutrition, the Art and Science of Physical, Emotional, and Spiritual Wellness. At the end, you'll have my contact info. Uh-oh, I hope I can control that. I wasn't quite ready, so we'll see. Okay, we're gonna go with it. So I have a small farm in Gustavus. My husband and I have been growing all of the vegetables, fruit, and for us that means berries because of living in Alaska. And we grow or gather all those vegetables. Whoops, okay, so we're gonna try and, sorry about that. Okay, I think I have control now. And then all of our meat as well. And so we've been doing that for the past 23 years, putting up all our food for all around the year. And that's one of my passions, is to really encourage people that you can grow more of your food for year-round consumption. And we've never had fancy equipment. I hear that as kind of like the biggest excuse. And we're very small and very funky. And I think I'm just gonna have to keep hitting these slides. I must have done something wrong somewhere. Anyhow, so now we're market producers in Gustavus. We sell produce and herbs in Gustavus and Juneau. And I also have dried herbs for sale. Some companies buy them around the state. So yeah, that's kind of our summary. We are super small, super diverse, and superbly inefficient. And we try to get as much of our fertility as possible from local sources. Being in Southeast, we have access to leaves. That's a wonderful thing. Seaweed. Seaweed is a huge thing for us. And then fish waste. Those are our prime fertilizers. And so as Mel introduced, I am a registered herbalist with the American Herbalist Guild, and I really give my kudos to the American Herbalist Guild founders. As you might know, there's not licensure for herbalists in the United States, and that's because the founders of this guild realized there needed to be a professional standard for herbalists and a peer review process, and definitely a standard of the profession, but we didn't want to exclude native traditions and the value that they offer. And so it's a pretty inclusive organization while setting a great standard. Yes, what is an Asian bodywork therapist? It means that I use the Eastern traditions and really look at the body as a pattern of nature. And then if you've ever had acupuncture or know anything of acupressure, pretty much every one of these points has a physical, spiritual, and an emotional significance to them. And you might notice a theme here. So I'm also a transformational nutrition coach, which means that for me, nutrition is not just the food on our plate, it's our body, minds, and spirits, and how we show up in the world each day. So I see clients in person in Gustavus, and I also see clients long distance through telehealth. My last credential is that I am an imperfect student. I used to think that my family was uniquely dysfunctional, and I think they are still uniquely dysfunctional, but I've realized how much more wounded and hurt people are out there in this world. And if we can just all do our work and show up each day and be our best, there's a lot of work that needs done out there, right? So yesterday, Eva Burke, she gave this really beautiful keynote presentation about systemic problems. And I'm going to bring us down and just, yeah, we need to show up for those systemic and changing the whole big stuff. We got to start, make sure we got our personal stuff in order. And really, we're not limiting ourselves. So many of us limit our potential. And that's really what my talk's going to be about. All right, so kind of the order of things is I'm going to probably spend about the first half talking about nutrition as a holistic concept. And what really brought me here was number one, personal experience, and one of my teachers just being like, how much can I really teach you until you set down that bat and stop beating yourself over the head? And that really drove home for me, and I thought about it, and I wanted to change it, and I was aware of what was happening. But what I've realized through more work is that I really needed to change more than just my thinking. I had to change my beliefs and hardwired stuff that was going on. And I see with my clients who really want to change, they want to have better health. And somewhere along the way, it's like they hit a wall. And why is that? Like, why is change so hard? Why is getting where we want to go? Why does it elude us? So that's where I feel like the greater work on spirit and emotions also is important. And so we're going to go through the process of like identifying our limiting beliefs, the things that hold us back, and learning how to shift them. I'm going to give you 4 steps to take away, and I hope you do. All right. And oops, I wanted to say also before I switch that slide, is just that this is a super safe space. I really appreciate the respect people are showing on this conference, and we're just going to really hold that respect there here if anyone shares personal information. Yeah, so I think that's it. So I want to start with thoughts and beliefs and just kind of the difference. We might not all know the difference between them. So thoughts are really like what guide us through the day. Most of our day we're in thoughts. We're not super attached to them. Like the sky is blue, I'm going to do this. Our thoughts are pretty changeable. Like we might notice, oh, I want to go water that plant, and we stick our hand in the soil and oh, plant doesn't need water, no big deal. Whereas our beliefs, those are like much deeper. We've got emotion tied into them. And so positive beliefs, they would be, I'm worthy, I'm capable. And on the other hand, what we would say are more negative or limiting beliefs are things like I'm not worthy, or I'm going to fail, or blank for me, or sorry, blank is for other people, but not for me. And unfortunately, these beliefs can extend over our whole lifetime and really limit what we allow ourselves to achieve. So to make my point another way, nutrition is just a word, right? But when we think of nutrition, it brings up a response in you, and you might have some thoughts, and some of you might have had some experiences that cause also some emotions. Like if someone tried to force you to eat food that was healthy, you really didn't like or want to be eating. And also, how else do we nourish ourselves? Through art or music, dance, pets. For many of us, service to others is very nourishing. And then I want to take this to a different level and just talk about the example of weight loss. It's a way to unpack how we can be limited if we just think of nutrition as a physical thing. And I want to say here that really any health issue you could substitute for weight loss. Why I'm going to talk about weight loss is because it's just a super common issue for so many people. And if weight loss were really just a physical matter, or just about calories and servings, then there wouldn't be so many diets out there, right? And so many people still struggling to lose weight. So it's not just mathematics, there's more to it. And what are some of the reasons in general we just don't achieve our health goals? Well, number one, as the last few years have proven, people really, really resist being told what to do or how to live. When someone tells you how to eat or what not to eat, it only goes so far for so long. And then how about motivation? You might really want this thing, but what about all the steps to get there? How much work it's going to take? Are you really willing to go all in? And change is really scary. So like, has anyone said, well, I'll start that next week. And then when next week comes, do you actually start it, or do you find another reason to delay? And so when you delay, the question is, why are you delaying? Let's dig into that. And maybe you're just trying to do too much too fast, and you need to start smaller and build up. So why? So what that means when I say why is if someone tells you you need to do something, like a doctor or a friend, it's not really, it's kind of abstract, it's not personal. And to really be motivated, we need to think about, why do I want to do this? What's important to me? And so if it is weight loss, what's that goal? For some women, it's want to look really good in their wedding dress. It's really tangible, and those photos are going to be around for a long time. Others, it might be feel they can't play with their kids because of their current situation, or it might be pain. And if it's one of these things, so pain, like what is that end thing you really want besides just being out of pain? You got to visualize that and keep those clear images as your motivating points, because things are going to get hard, right? It starts out and we're excited, and then the hard part comes. The other thing, well, we used to all say that, it used to be a saying that we didn't live in a bubble, right? Well, so much for that. Inevitably, you're going to go to your sister's birthday party, or you're going to be in the snack food aisle of the grocery store, and you need to have a backup plan in advance to keep yourself on track with your goal, so that you don't start feeling like you fail. Because as soon as we start feeling like we're failing, we go into a spiral, and at some point we're going to give up. So let's not let the spiral happen. And part of this is having accountability and support. We need someone to hold our hand and help us when the going gets hard. So in summary, we need not to just have the information of what to do, the emotional investment, the steps broken down into what's realistic for each of us, and then accountability and support to keep us on track. So I talked about nutrition broadly, and I just want to ask each of you to reflect for a second on physical nutrition. And what does that mean for you? And I wish I could see the chat and have you enter words there and be a little more interactive, but I'm not tech savvy. So I just kind of came up with some words that I thought the crowd might come up with. And I guess things like wild or Alaskan or homegrown, home cooked. You might have come up with things like vitamins or minerals or nutrients. And for some, kind of health food. And one thing I want to say here is that more modern approaches to nutrition realize that there's not a one-size-fits-all kind of program. It doesn't work. There are some basic things we all know. So especially in Alaska, most of us aren't eating enough vegetables because they're kind of hard to come by. Most of us eat too many carbs because unfortunately they're too easy to come by. And in general, sugar just isn't supportive of health. In a more nuanced view of nutrition, it goes deeper and is even more individualized. So let's think of someone who might have experienced some really deep trauma, and maybe they just still don't have a good support system in place. If I go to this person and in my best intent, I tell them those cookies, they're not good for you and you shouldn't have them. But maybe those cookies are like one thing that makes this person feel secure. I might be doing more harm than good. So real nutrition is about making sure that we're addressing people's pain points and their stressors, and not just the physical aspect of nutrition. So one of the tools I use for this in my practice is a food and lifestyle journal, and these can be intimidating. So this is just an excerpt, and really I would have you record all 3 meals, your snacks, pretty much everything you're putting in, you're going to record it, and you're also going to record how you feel before you put that thing in your mouth and how you feel after you put that thing in your mouth. It can be just really interesting for people to notice, and some more information comes up that maybe they hadn't thought about before. All right, so I'm going to jump over to spiritual nutrition. Just ask you to reflect what this means to you. And I really wish we used the word spiritual nutrition more. I really like that concept. It's not something we talk about with each other. So when I refer to spiritual nutrition, I think of connection. I think of connection with ourselves. I think of connection with others. I think of connection with nature. and I think of connection with higher power. And clearly, spirituality impacts our health. Studies show an average 25% decreased mortality risk in people who attend church. Might get some of you out there more, huh? Spirituality and religion are in general just associated with more positive behaviors and a decrease in behaviors that we consider negative, and better coping skills with our own mortality and better recovery rates from surgery and illness. And I like it. For me, it's very personal. Just living in Alaska, I just feel like we're so fortunate as Alaskans because we have so many ways to connect with our food, from starting seeds to picking berries to hunting, fishing, herbs. I feel that this relationship with food requires more effort than just buying something in a package. It affects all of us, and it might affect us in different ways and different levels, but it still affects all of us, and it's a great thing. And I think it's a wonderful thing too that we just have this fish, game, berries, herbs, mushrooms. In some parts of the state, we have local honey or grains. Like, yeah, how cool is that? And so, do we remember to express enough gratitude for all the opportunities we have to interact with our food? And can you notice that just thinking about gratitude like puts us in a much more positive state, a much more open state? So, juxtaposition that, I'm curious what people's emotional response is to this picture. And one of my responses is just to say, why are we so fixated on the sweet flavor? What does it do for us? And as an herbalist, there aren't a whole lot of herbs out there that are sweet. What I consider the most powerful herbs are actually bitter. And why is it that when we taste something bitter, we don't savor it? We don't have a reaction of, oh man, that made me feel alive. And so one way we demonstrate this on our farm is this flower on the left. It's called spilanthes, and it's a small flower. We grow it in our greenhouse. And when you take the smallest little bit of this flower, it makes your tongue tingle. And inevitably, if we have a school group out visiting, it turns into a contest of how many flowers a kid can eat. Because literally, if you eat multiple flowers, you start to drool. The action of this flower spilanthes is like echinacea, and it stimulates your salivary glands in large amounts. And the thing that I love to witness is that these kids don't hold back. Like, they're in it for the full experience. You know, they want to go touch the nettles and feel the sting. And what happens? Why is it we lose that reckless enthusiasm as we get older? Like, maybe we don't need the reckless part, but why don't we just go for the whole experience, the whole range of experiences, and embrace them? So can we embrace the full range of flavors again? Let's start with that. And why is it that most of us reach for a carrot when we're upset? What does chocolate or sugar or junk food do that a carrot doesn't? It's a question I want you to keep asking. And to put this another way, has anyone ever wanted something? It's important to realize that when we want something, the first thing that happens is we have an emotion. We have that desire, the craving. We want that thing. And the second thing that happens is that we back this up with rational thoughts and why we should have it. But the feeling comes first. And so, if that's true, the next time we want something, what if we recognize that the chocolate or the sugar or the junk food, maybe it's not the thing we actually want. Maybe it's something different. Maybe we want to feel safe or fulfilled or content. Let's explore that. So, emotional nutrition. What does this mean to you? And it might make you feel uncomfortable when we focus on emotions. I just want to say that's normal, and we're going to be okay with that. It's not something most of us talk about in a group. So emotional nutrition Emotions shape pretty much everything. It shapes how we perceive, digest, absorb everything that we encounter in our daily lives. Emotions are like the data that we use to send to our brain of what's happening outside of us. And emotional health is being aware of our feelings, how we relate with others. When we're emotionally healthy, our mental health is in a positive, good state. And emotional health means I take care of myself. And it also means I take responsibility for my feelings. No one else makes me angry. I make myself happy or sad. It's my choice. And the last note I have is just caring for ourselves, women in particular, and healers. Really, it can be a struggle for us. And so remembering to prioritize that. All right, and this is the fun. I don't know if you've ever seen one of these. This is the emotion wheel, and there's different variations of these. And in the center, we have, this chart has 6, some have 4, some have more, but the center is our core emotions. And subdivide out and radiate into different other emotions. And what this chart doesn't address is that really like 70% of the time, we're actually what's just called neutral emotions. Like how we get through the day. We're okay, we're getting things done, and we're just going forward. But of course, there's all these other times when we have other emotions coming up. The positive emotions, that's when our needs are being met. And of course, that's where we all want to be, right? In that positive side. Yet, if you look at this chart, fully less than half of this chart is positive emotions. So what does that mean? Maybe it means that we're supposed to embrace all these other emotions just as much as we want to live in and embrace happiness. Change our perspective if we're going to approach life this way. What we think of as negative emotions, this is when our needs aren't being met. And we need to ask, if our needs aren't being met, why is that? Like none of us seek negative emotions. We don't want to be in grief or fear. And if any of you wake up saying like, oh yeah, I just think I need to feel some more heartbreak today, I'm a little concerned. It's important to feel these emotions, because if we don't, we push them away and then we start to do numbing behaviors. And that certainly doesn't bring us to a good place. The most important is that we do what is called facing and embracing our emotions. Has anyone ever been really angry and tried to just pretend that nothing's bothering them, I'm fine? And does that go very well, really? Usually it doesn't. We have to accept, like, why is the anger there? And dive into that. Things to ask anger are what is making me angry? What didn't go the way I wanted it to? What might need to change? And am I trying to distract myself from pain elsewhere in my life? So each person has to find their own message and their feelings. But I want to say that once you start to do this, it might be a little confusing and hard at first, but it gets easier. Practice. You just got to keep practicing. So why is this important? Has anyone felt any intense emotions in the past couple of years? Or maybe had to deal with strong emotions in other people? It's been a lot, right? Many of us are coping with so many unknowns. It brings up a lot of fear, anxiety, not to mention anger. And when we have strong emotions, we tend to behave in ways that aren't in alignment with who we truly want to be. Isn't it interesting that when we see something that we don't like or it triggers us, we say things like, I can't stomach that, or I lost my appetite. So strong emotions, they pull us from our center. So how do we get from this person who we are to who we truly want to be? How do we get from here to there? And what I'm going to say next, it blew my mind when I first heard it, so it might blow yours too. And that's that emotions last approximately 90 seconds. So I'm going to guess that some of you might have experienced an emotion for more than 90 seconds or thought you did. And I want to ask, has anyone tried to stay in joy for like a week or a month? Anyone got that happiness thing nailed? It's pretty hard. Like joy is an intense emotion. It takes a lot of energy. And when we feel like we're actually feeling an emotion for more than 90 seconds, it's because we're replaying the scene. We're dissecting what happened, what could have been, what should have been, what you're going to say if you see them again. And the problem is that when we're stuck in the replay, it means we have less energy available for the present moment. So this is based on the work of Dr. Jill Bolte-Taylor, and you may have heard of her. She's the neuroscientist who had a stroke and was able to document every step of it as she went through it in her healing process. So this is just the excerpt from that, and her saying that, yes, when you feel emotions for more than 90 seconds, you need to look at the thoughts you're thinking because they're re-stimulating circuitry in your brain to a physical response. So if emotions only last 90 seconds, why is it we play the tape back so much? And it's because we need explanations. Like, we're such curious creatures. We need to understand what's happening to us and why. And unfortunately, we need explanations so desperately that we'll create a negative story, a negative meaning, even when we don't need to. So let's say you see someone at an event, you're at a gathering, and you wave at them. Anyone done that? Said hello, and they don't respond, or maybe they turn away. What do we start doing? Well, some of us start internalizing it and start asking, what did I do wrong? Do they not like me? Did I offend them last week? And if it happens again, if we really start to build up that story, right, we start to really invest in it. So I want to break this down into, there's an event, we feel an emotion, and we come up with an explanation. And the problem is that when you have an emotion, maybe not the problem, just what happens is that when you have an emotion, and you combine it with an explanation, it becomes a belief. At first, you might just think of that belief once, like the person that didn't wave at me, they don't like me. But if you keep rerunning through that scene and keep telling yourself that negative story, that thread, it turns into a cord. And in our bodies, those cords become neurological pathways. Beliefs are neurological pathways that we don't think about them. After a while, they just are there unconsciously. So another example I want to use for neurological pathways is like our winter clothes. Like, none of us have a list at the door of like parka, mittens, boots. We don't have to think how to put on our mittens, our hats. We just do it because we've done it over and over again, right? We know how to do it. We don't have to, it's an unconscious thing. And that's what our beliefs are. They've become unconscious. And they can just take up this whole vortex of energy. It's important to realize when we're getting stuck in these stories, because our beliefs are can be like ruts in a road. We're setting up neurological pathways and following them unconsciously. So where I want to take you is how to dismantle these stories and beliefs that aren't serving you. We need to change the beliefs to ones that do serve us and move us toward who we want to be, toward our higher purpose. And the caveat I want to say here is, if anyone's got trauma, that's a longer process. Like, this is a foundational piece of it. It's a much longer process to deal with, and we need to have a therapist or someone really there to support you and help you. So we're not going to unpack that today. We're not going to go there. We're going to stay on a more superficial level. The thing I want to say about trauma is that trauma can be anything at any age to anyone. Trauma is just when we don't have the skills and the experience to cope with the event. Most often trauma does happen when we're young because before the age of 8, we really have limited experience. We don't have a lot of ways to cope or understand the world. And that's when these beliefs threads start forming, and then they just deepen and deepen over, unfortunately, possibly our whole lifetime. So we're going to start today with the training wheels. And we all have a story or a belief that impacts our lives and limits us. Some of the most common themes are along the lines of not being good enough, not deserving, feeling shame. What's the belief that limits you? And once we have awareness, we can rewrite the story. So if you can remember, and you might need to do this after this session and take some time for yourself some other time, but step one is to really go back to that experience. And what was the earliest? Go back to the earliest experience of when you might have started inputting this belief into you. What did you hear or see? All the details that you can remember. And again, if it's a deep traumatic experience, you're going to need a therapist to be there. Don't do it on your own. And I'm going to use a more superficial example of just not feeling good enough in your life as an adult. And just a possible thing that happened was, as a child, you came home from school maybe, and a parent sat you down and said, in a stern voice, maybe a bit disgruntled or unhappy, and you could see all that, they said, your grades, they're just not good enough, and started to talk about some other things. And what that adult said was, your grades aren't good enough. But what that tiny little child heard was, you're not good enough. And can you see how over time, this little thread started, and you've been feeding it and weaving it into your life and letting it limit you? Number one is to realize that that story is so not true. And to help you with that, you can think about what is true and what is facts. So true can be pretty confusing. True is like social media these days. There are so many truths out there. It can be hard to navigate, right? So what's true for me is not true for you. What is fact? Facts tangible. Facts don't change. Maybe your grades weren't great. Who are you now? Does the belief you created hold water? I really like the Buddhists have just this really simple saying, are you sure? Before you judge, are you sure? And another tool to use to reframe your story is to realize that I am always at the center of my story. And what if you step back? What if you can look at the event from a different perspective? So in the scenario I gave, what if you look back as the adult in this scenario? What is true? What would have been true for them? What would have been fact for them? And can you create a different story? What if this adult, what if they really just were concerned for you? What if they wanted a better future for you than what they had for themselves? What if they wanted you to have all the opportunities that they didn't have? So is it possible to rewrite your story from this new perspective with more grace? And what I want to say here also is that not every story has a happy ending. Bad things happen. Our parents or other people have limiting beliefs, their own stories and mental health issues that can get in the way. In this case, can you just let go of blaming yourself and realize it's not about you? All right, so that was all step one. Whew. All right, step two is just allow yourself to feel. And feeling is getting out of your head. Feeling is in being in your body. So when you remember that story, that original story, allow your body to use all its senses. Find a safe space. If you need a therapist, use a therapist. But use all your senses and just observe what's happening in your body as you go through this event and kind of reviewing it. Be curious and don't judge. And feeling's going to be hard sometimes. It's okay. So third, now that you've gone through the feelings, investigate what message or messages the emotions bring. Like why? Why are they there? Be curious, be honest with yourself, and trust. And trust because even our worst experiences, in the end, they make us resilient. You have to recognize first, you're surviving, you've survived. And after you realize you've survived, with more time, you can thrive. And the ways we survive These shape us and they become our core strengths. So what are your strengths? What makes you great? What makes you unique, resilient? What do you have to share with others because of your experience? And step 4, now that you've gone through all those other steps, is to breathe deeply and be compassionate with yourself. This is so important. If you can, let go of that whole story. If you can visualize it, some people like to visualize it as like a biodegradable, non-toxic box, and they're going to lift it out of their body. They're just going to throw it in a pond somewhere where it sinks and biodegrades non-toxically. Or some people like to breathe it out with intentional breath like fire and let go of it. Whatever works for you. If it's possible, write out your new belief. Write it somewhere where you can see it and you can feel it and you can start those threads forming into a cord of your new belief. And lastly, if possible, can you forgive? And the thing is, forgiveness, it's not about you. Or it is about you, sorry. It's not about them, it's about you. So forgiveness doesn't mean absolving, it just means letting go of it, moving forward. So a simple sentence that I like to use is, I forgive you for not being the blank I needed you to be. And you can share that with the person or not, that's up to you. So again, trust the message, move forward, and I put compassionate with yourself on here twice, because truly, I want you to be compassionate with yourself. So the steps were to realize the story is not true, allow yourself to feel, embrace and investigate the feelings, let go and choose love. So rewriting your story is important, and practicing the feelings and new emotions to rewire them. And it doesn't mean that you're not going to feel the old feeling ever again, but when it comes, you're going to be able to say, nope, my truth is, and it gets easier. All right, I'm going to do a time check. I guess I have a little more, but we're going to go pretty fast here because I'm running out of time. So I just want to honor the light, love, and the beauty within each of you for showing up and being willing to do this work and to be vulnerable. And I want to just to reflect back to you as you reframe your stories and live your days. Is life happening for you or to you? Are you accepting responsibility for your emotions? And are you exploring them all so that you can transform? And lastly, a reminder on emotional health. Emotional health is knowing who I am, knowing how I got this way, knowing why I continue to be this way, and self-acceptance. No excuses, no blame, and going about my day with intention instead of reaction. And again, self-care. So that is all I have, and I want to thank you and take some questions. And I think I'm going to need Mel to help me with questions.
All right. There have been some nice comments in the chat. If you people have had some nice responses, and thank you, Jen. That was a wonderful presentation. I really enjoyed it because sometimes I just need to stop and live with intention and breathe and not.
We all do.
It's a good reminder. It's a very, very good reminder. I agree, Marcia. It's a very enjoyable topic and beautiful food for thought, Marcia says. So just checking to see if there were any questions. Tessa, who works with me, was saying that she was learning more about Ayurveda, a science of wellness, and she shared a bit about that. She didn't have a question in there, but it is a really, really good. Nicole asks if you have any good hacks for utilizing your food to help reflect on these other lessons?
Well, I think number one is mindfulness when you're eating, and really slowing down and chewing your food and appreciating it. So the one thing I can say on a personal level is we've spent some time in the bush. And one time we went out and we didn't have enough food to get us through the winter. And it was a fairly intense experience. And the gift of it was that it really made us, like, we knew we didn't have enough. So we savored what we had so much. And it's really hard to do in the busyness of life and the world, but it's a great exercise.
Yeah, and Jen, I was doing a group the other day, and they talked about doing an activity once every now and again, which is when you're eating, go slow and don't do anything but eat. Don't look at your phone, don't read a magazine, don't look at the newspaper, just focus on your food and actually be there in that moment, because we all look at our phones when we eat. I do it. We all look at something. We don't just focus on the food. Sometimes we forget that, and it's a good exercise to do every now and again. Just
Totally.
is what they said, and I thought, I'm going to try to do that more and more, not look at my phone.
And getting back to those flavors, like, doing exercises with put a sweet food in your mouth and let it sit there and dissolve. And maybe you're good with it. To me, if you keep it there 30 seconds, a minute, and is that sweet food as good as you first thought it was? And then do it with a different kind of food. And it's another kind of great awareness, mindfulness exercise.
Yeah, I think that's great. So we've got a few thank yous from Thomas Andrade and Leslie Jones. Thank you so much for this thoughtful presentation. I teach
Awesome.
mindful eating exercises.
Thank you all so much. Great.
So thanks everybody for attending, and again, thanks Jen for a great presentation. It is now time for a lunch break. Maybe you can go do a lunch break without looking at your phone. That might be kind of fun, but so we are off, but you can also go over to the wonderful auction. There's some great stuff in the auction, and help out Food Policy Council. And we are meeting back at 12:15 for our lunchtime keynote speakers. So hope you'll all join us back then. And have a great afternoon, everybody.